In the second year of Seti I's reign, a child was born into the royal palace. His name was Ramses. He wasn't born to rule, but fate was already clearing a path for him. He grew up in the palace corridors, quietly watching. He listened more than he spoke. He observed his father in court, studied the rituals in the temples, and stood in silence as soldiers marched past him. He was taught reading and writing, and the sacred teachings of the gods, but Ramses focused on one thing: power. He realized early that being king wasn't just about wearing a crown. It was about holding the nation together when everything threatened to pull it apart. When Seti went to war, Ramses followed. He didn't fight, but he listened. He learned about allies, rebellions, and the fragile balance of loyalty. By the age of 15, he wasn't just a prince anymore. Seti named him co-regent, not for ceremony, but because Egypt was too vast to be ruled by one man alone. From that moment, Ramses was no longer learning to rule, he was ruling. Seti I died in his 11th year on the throne. The priests mourned, the temples fell silent, and Egypt stood still. For just a moment, before the weight of the crown shifted to his son. But there was no chaos, no struggle. Ramses had already been seen as a ruler. He had signed treaties, judged disputes, and stood in battle formations. Now he would stand alone. The coronation took place at Karnak, before rows of towering columns. The double crown, white and red, was placed upon his head. Incense burned, drums echoed, and voices chanted the names of kings long gone. Now, his name joined theirs. People watched from across the two lands: farmers, soldiers, priests, some with awe, some with doubt, but all knew that Egypt's future now rested on the shoulders of this young man. Ramses didn't celebrate, he didn't smile, he stood like stone, unmoved, unshaken. He made no sweeping changes, no grand speeches. Instead, he moved quietly, reaffirming the governors, restoring temple gifts, reminding the gods that nothing had been broken. He visited Thebes, Memphis, and Heliopolis. He showed the people that their king was present, not distant. Not just a name on a wall, but a man walking their streets. To outsiders, Egypt seemed as it always had been. But from within, something had shifted. Ramses had become Pharaoh, and he intended to stay. Becoming Pharaoh was one thing. Keeping the throne, holding it, shaping it was another. Ramses didn't wait for challenges. He built a kingdom that would not be shaken. He turned to the army first, not just by rank or loyalty, but by strength. Veterans replaced favorites, training intensified, drills became longer, shields sharper, orders stricter. Then came the administration. Grain was measured more carefully. Taxes were monitored with new scribes. Every shipment, every caravan was logged under the king's eye. But his boldest move wasn't a reform, it was a vision. On the edge of the eastern frontier, far from Thebes, he ordered the construction of a new capital, per Ramses. Not a temple, not a monument. A living city, built from dust and command. Wide streets, military quarters. Temples to gods old and new. Every wall carried his name. Every entrance faced the sunrise. To his people it was a wonder. To his enemies a warning. Egypt would no longer watch the world from behind its borders. It would lead. In temple carvings, Ramses stood taller. No longer beside the gods, but among them. This was no longer the son of Seti. This was Ramses the Great. And Egypt had begun to change in his image. Ramses had secured the throne. His name was etched in temples, his image carved beside the gods, and his authority reached from Nubia to the Delta. But peace in Egypt never lasted long. Not for a king who ruled during shifting sands. Beyond Egypt's borders, danger was growing. In the north, the Hittite Empire was expanding. Once distant rivals, they had now crept closer, into lands that Egypt once called its own. Cities that once sent tribute to Thebes were now flying Hittite banners. Local rulers no longer waited for Egyptian messengers. They were making deals with new powers. Ramses watched. He didn't react in haste. Instead, he built. He expanded supply lines, fortified the eastern frontier, ordered more weapons from royal workshops, and most importantly, he drilled his army harder than ever. He knew that battles weren't won by waiting. They were prepared for, long before the first arrow flies. But even as the threat of war grew louder, Ramesses did not call it war. Not yet. He still sent messengers, still exchanged letters, still signed treaties. To the world, he was the image of a wise and patient ruler. But behind the walls of his new capital, he was preparing for something greater. Not a skirmish, not a border raid. Ramesses was planning for a campaign, and the world would soon hear it. Year 5 of Ramesses' reign. 4 divisions, thousands of men, one direction north. The king was not watching from a palace. He led them, on horseback, in armor, his bow across his back. The target, Kadesh, a fortified city near the Orontes River. Once under Egyptian control, now taken by the Hittites. The journey was long, dust, heat, weeks on the road. But morale was high. Ramesses was young, bold, and marching with purpose. Scouts brought news. The Hittites have retreated. Kadesh is undefended. Ramesses smiled. The gods were with him. He ordered a push. Faster, no time to wait. He and the lead division, Amun, advanced quickly far ahead of the others. As they approached the city, silence, no resistance, no movement. They set camp near the river, confident, calm, victorious already in their minds. But then, 2 Hittite spies were caught. Under interrogation, the truth unraveled. The enemy hadn't fled. They were hidden, nearby, watching, waiting. It was a trap, and Ramesses had walked straight into it. The trap was already closing. From behind the hills near Kadesh, thousands of Hittite chariots thundered forward. They didn't march, they stormed, fast, loud, ruthless. The Egyptian camp unprepared. Soldiers were resting, bathing, unpacking supplies. There were no defenses, no warning. Then came the sound, wheels grinding, hooves striking, horns screaming. By the time the alarm was raised, the Hittites were already inside the camp. Chaos. Tents collapsed, horses panicked, men scattered in every direction. Some fought without armor, others fell without a fight. At the center of it all was Ramesses. He saw his army breaking, he saw his officers fleeing, and he didn't run. He mounted his chariot, gripped his bow, and rode straight into the heart of the attack. Alone at first, then with his guard behind him. He fired arrows without pause. His chariot cut through the enemy lines like lightning. He shouted, he charged, he fought. The men who had once doubted him now rallied behind him, not because he was king, but because he was there. He held the line, long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Ramesses turned the ambush into survival. The dust of battle settled, both sides withdrew. The city of Kadesh still stood, not taken, not destroyed. No clear victory, no grand conquest. But Ramesses told a different story. Across Egypt, walls were carved with scenes of glory. Ramesses, alone, facing hundreds, his bow drawn, his enemies fleeing, the gods watching above. At Abu Simbel, at Karnak, he became the hero of a battle no one truly won. He called it victory, and no one dared to argue. Scribes wrote his words into stone. Priests read them as truth. Children repeated them in hymns, and with every retelling, the myth grew. The Hittites? They told their own version quietly. But their silence in Egypt only helped the lie. Years later, a treaty was signed. Egypt and Hatti, peace at last. Both sides claimed strength, both claimed honor, but only one carved it in stone. Ramesses hadn't conquered Kadesh, but he conquered the story. Ramesses left behind more than stories. He left stone, temples, statues, colossal walls. His image? Everywhere. Not hidden inside shrines, but towering over cities, carved into cliffs, watching the Nile for eternity. He built at Luxor. He expanded Karnak. He raised the Ramesseum in Thebes, his mortuary temple. Massive, silent, immortal, but nothing spoke louder than Abu Simbel. 2 temples, cut into solid rock, deep in the desert. At the entrance, 4 seated statues of Ramesses, each the height of a modern building. Inside chambers lined with scenes of power and conquest. His face, his crown, his story. And then, the miracle. Twice a year, on February 22nd and October 22nd, the morning sun travels deep inside the temple and strikes the face of Ramesses, not by chance, but with precise design. This wasn't just architecture, it was declaration. Ramesses was not content with memory. He carved himself into eternity. Powerful kings build empires, but some build families too. Ramesses had many wives, but one stood apart, Nefertari. She wasn't just his queen, she was his equal. Her name appeared beside his on temple walls, her image carved in stone, not as a shadow, but as a presence. He built her a tomb in the Valley of the Queens, a masterpiece of color, grace, and devotion. Even in death, she was surrounded by beauty. In letters to foreign kings, he spoke of her with pride. He called her the one for whom the sun rises. And that may not have been poetry, but truth. Together, they had children. Many. Some would become generals, others priests. One, eventually, heir to the throne. He appeared with them in carvings and statues, not just as a god among mortals, but as a father among sons. To the world, he was a legend. To them, he was just father. Even the greatest kings needed something to come home to. Ramesses had his family. Ramesses lived longer than any king before him. 67 years on the throne, more than 90 years on earth. He outlived enemies, he outlived allies, he outlived most of his own children. By the end, he was more than a man. He was memory, walking. A figure so familiar that Egypt itself seemed to wear his face. He was buried in the Valley of the Kings. His tomb, deep, long, carved into the rock. But time was not kind. Thieves came, his body was moved, hidden, then hidden again, and yet he survived. Thousands of years later, his mummy was found, wrapped, intact. The face still there, the features unmistakable. Today, that same face lies in Cairo, inside the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, displayed in silence, preserved in shadow, still watching, still remembered. Ramesses did not live forever, but he made sure his story would.